Welcome to the Private Practice Startup Podcast, where we help ambitious private practitioners across the globe to brand themselves and grow their dream practices. We chat with successful private practitioners, business coaches, and marketing experts, bringing you tons of practice building ninja tips. Visit privatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and our signature marketing e-course. Here are your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Campbell and Katie Lemieux.
Hey there, Startup Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. And we are, as always, excited you're here. If you are a longtime listener, thanks for being part of the Startup Nation family. And if you're brand new to our podcast, we so appreciate that you happen on the podcast, and we hope you'll stay for a very long time. Last week, we hope that you guys joined us as Kate and I shared our stories from failure to thriving, and we shared our private practice story journey. So that is definitely one to listen to as we talk about all the trials and tribulations that we went through to get to where we are today. I'm really excited about today's guest, and Kate might be more excited because we are talking to Monica LeBlanc and Hannah Woody about understanding the Enneagram and you. Really. So we're going to talk about you, the Enneagram, and we're actually going to be doing a part 2 of this is understanding the Enneagram, you, and in crisis. So you guys will want to make sure that you not only listen to this one, but definitely listen to the next one. And also too, if you are new to us, we have a gift for you. That is our A to Z cheat sheet, the essentials for building and growing your dream practice. Head over to privatepracticestartup.com, slide on over to the resources tab. There you'll see the A to Z cheat sheet, and it comes with several days of practice building emails for your practice success. So a little bit about Monica and Hannah. They are both counselors in private practice in Asheville, North Carolina. They're both certified to teach the Enneagram in the Embodiment tradition. They use the Enneagram to help themselves and others explore what barriers get in the way of people leading their most fulfilled and connected lives. Welcome, ladies.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
We are excited to have you. And like I said, I know Kate's really excited to have you because she's been learning and studying about the Enneagram. And I only took a test. So this is going to be like all new information to me. And I'm actually excited to learn a lot about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you guys here. I think it was probably midway through last year, 2019, and here we are in June already of 2020. And so I remember seeing a lot of people talking about the Enneagram, and I kept seeing the word Enneagram, and I was thinking, what the heck is an Enneagram? I had to research it, and then I was like, oh, wow, this is really fascinating. And I dove in and I started reading more about it online. I took a quiz or two and just thought it was so fascinating. And I got the book, The Road Back to You, and read that. Thought I knew my type. And then I took a quiz the other day and I was like, wait a minute, this is telling me something totally different. So I'm not really fully clear on what I am. I think I have an idea, and I'm looking forward to getting more clarity and really understanding more from what you ladies have an expertise in. And I know Katie's excited about that too. So Startup Nation, let's just dive in. Where do we start with this Enneagram stuff, ladies?
Yeah, I mean, you're just first off that your experience is normal. The Enneagram is so vast and complex, and it's not your typical personality system where you just learn about traits about yourself. It's a personality system that shows you where your pitfalls are, that shows you what gets in your way, shows you how you guard yourself against vulnerability, and how you try to show up in the world. And ultimately, a lot of times the ways we try to show up in the world when we're fixated in our personality are ways that get in our way and keep us stuck. So the personality shows us who we are and what our traits are, and then how to break those traits and how to live a life that is more connected and feels more fulfilling to you.
The other thing that I would say is that your experience being confused about, I took a test, but it said this thing, but I thought I was this, is also super normal. And we hear that from folks all the time. And part of the reason for that, and I think this is something that folks should know, is that the tests are great and they're really helpful in kind of introducing you to the Enneagram in a way that's accessible, but they're not really conclusive. There's yet to be a test formed that takes into account the complexity of the Enneagram that can give you a conclusion that is relatively accurate and reliable. And I like the Enneagram because it is so complex that it mirrors the complexity of our humanity. And I think that's a really important element that makes the Enneagram different from the MBTI or the Zodiac or other kinds of ways of dealing with personality, is that mirroring of the complexity of humanity.
Just out of curiosity, how did you all get involved with being experts with the Enneagram and really specializing in your practices with this and teaching others too?
Yeah, I discovered the Enneagram when I was 19 years old. A friend of mine at college, we were both psych majors, and he asked me if I'd ever heard about it, and I said no. And he gave me the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. And just reading it fascinated me. I had no idea that there was 9 unique perspectives that people have walking around in the world. I was very intrigued by the idea that that what I thought was the right way to do things or the right way to live my life, that might be getting in my way, that it might be blocking me from actually discovering my higher self, or blocking me from being the kind of person that I really wanted to be. One of my favorite descriptions of the Enneagram is the 9 ways of suffering. And so it's kind of how we're all suffering in our own ways. And I was really intrigued by that. I was really invested in self-work. I wanted to figure that part of myself out. So I started reading the book, I started studying, and I essentially didn't put it down. And I bought other books, and probably about 7 years ago, I ended up joining, I found one of my main Enneagram teachers, Dr. Lissa Friedman, and I ended up joining her like big, long training program. And so we would get together several times a month for an entire year, and we would just dive into the Enneagram, all things Enneagram. And so I got certified in her tradition, which is called the Embodiment tradition. And so I've pretty much been teaching it ever since. I've been an avid Enneagram enthusiast for probably going on maybe like 15 years now. And I've been teaching it for about 7. So it really is the kind of thing that once you really dive into it, it becomes a bit of an obsession, and it's so relevant, and it connects to every single thing in my life that I really can't stop thinking about it. So teaching comes very naturally because it's always in my brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of like time on it. And I'm also curious for you, what has like changed, like what was shown to you about the places that you're suffering and all the stuff that the Enneagram shows you?
Yeah. Oh goodness. Well, I actually, it took me years to find my type. I didn't know what my right type was. I was reading about all the personalities. I was relating to this one and that one, but none of them really ever felt like home. And so once I finally found, I'm a self-preservation 4. So there's 9 personality types, and we have subtypes underneath them, and movement, like all kinds of aspects of the Enneagram that make the personalities really dynamic and make them different from one another. And so mine was a particularly hard one to find because it's not talked about a lot. But essentially what I learned was that I hold myself back a lot, that I lean into the negative way too much, and that my personality influences me to choose suffering over choosing things that are easier, or things that are light, or things that are life-giving to me. And so, and all Enneagram 4s do that. We kind of lean into the negative and lean into what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with us. And so being able to work on that really, really has changed my life. And it's completely shifted what I thought I was capable of. I mean, I had no idea when I started studying the Enneagram that one day I would own my own businesses, and that I would be an entrepreneur, and that I would be capable of doing what I am right now. And the Enneagram was a huge part of that, of helping me see where I was getting in my own way.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing. And before, Monica, we want to know a little bit about your story and then really dive into the introduction of Enneagram. But before we do that, I just wanted to take a quick moment for our sponsor.
Okay, guys, it's sponsor time. You know what? Instead of reading a script about Gusto's payroll and benefits, we wanted to tell you what small business owners say, the people who use Gusto every day. Here's what one small business owner says. With Gusto, I think of payroll as a 30-second job. The website is so friendly and a joy to use. Friendly payroll? You don't hear that every day. And how about Amy from Utah? Amy says, I love Gusto so much. It's so painless. It's like going to the spa, and we have great options and rates, even though we're a super small team. Like going to the spa? Wow. And here's what Mneet says about Gusto's support team. Whenever something comes up, I reach out and literally 24 hours later, they tell us what to do or assure us that we've already handled it. Smart technology and friendly humans, that's super cool. Honestly, the list goes on, and right now our listeners get 3 months free when they go to gusto.com/PPS. Yep, 3 months of payroll, benefits, administration, and more, totally free. Again, that's gusto.com/PPS.
There are so many ways to keep your practice organized, but Therapy Notes is by far the best. Their easy to use, secure platform lets you not only do billing, scheduling, and progress notes, but also create a client portal to share documents and request signatures. Plus, they offer amazing unlimited phone support. So when you have a question, they're there so you can get help fast. Get started with Therapy Notes today, trusted by over 60,000 professionals. Go to therapynotes.com and enter promo code PPS, as in Private Practice Startup, and you'll get 2 months for free. Also, you can listen to episode 54, where we interviewed Brad Pleiner and took an in-depth view into their EHR.
So I was introduced to the Enneagram by Hanna. Hanna and I are graduate school besties. We survived grad school together. I survived grad school a lot because of Hanna. And she came over to my house one day. I was hosting a backyard barbecue because my house was the party spot while we were in school. And so she came over to my house and she brought this giant blue book and she kind of shoved it at me and was like, you should check out this chapter. And I was like, kind of having a barbecue, but okay. So I went in the yard and started reading this chapter, and it was this sensation of like, oh, who is this person that has been inside my head? Who is this inside my head fairy that knows me like this? So my experience was really different from Hanna in that I knew right away, and I found my home right away. I would say that the only thing that kind of caused me to know it better would be finding my subtype, which I think is another thing that for another day. But it definitely opened up these patterns that I had seen in myself and my relationships, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why I couldn't get the results that I wanted, like why I couldn't have more fulfilling relationships, or why I couldn't set good boundaries, or why I couldn't find my voice and learn about myself in the ways that I really wanted to. And the Enneagram was basically an answer to all of those questions for me. It was like, this is why you are tired all the time. This is why you don't take great care of yourself. And that was really good information to have. It's been life-changing information to have. And I want to echo Hannah's sentiments in that now that I am teaching, I went through the same certification program that Hanna did, just one cohort behind her. So she graduated and I kind of apprenticed under her, and we started teaching together when I was in the middle of my certification. And then I went through the same year-long program. But yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a journey, and it's been life-changing, and I'm grateful to be where I'm at today.
Monica, share with us your type.
Oh yeah, I'm also a self-preservation subtype. I'm a Enneagram type 2, wing 3.
Ah, okay. Maybe I can learn some things as you talk today.
Yeah.
That's the type, as I read the book, I really connected to. But then I've taken other quizzes as I was sharing before we hit the record button, and they tell me different numbers. So I'm like, wait a minute, what am I? I don't really know.
Yeah.
So
the best way to figure out your type really is to tune in, like read about all of the types. And see which ones immediately you're like, oh yeah, this one kind of sounds like me, or I really relate to this. Eliminate the ones that you don't relate to at all, that don't sound like you. So it's really the bulk of the personality traits, like tuning into what you resonate, what feels like it's been the most consistent over your whole lifetime.
It's probably a good time for us to start I guess for you guys to start debriefing us on the different types. And so where should we start with that?
So a little disclaimer before we start talking about the types is that when we talk about the types quickly, which we will do here, it's important to note that we're going to be talking about them in a way that highlights what we call the fixation, which are kind of the more negative, seemingly survival strategy pieces of the type. And that's because those are the places where people tend to be most familiar. And when we're teaching quickly, it's just important to note that that is feedback that we get sometimes, is that, it sounds so negative. And part of that is it's hard to see yourself. And the other part is when we're teaching quickly, sometimes we have to kind of gloss over the complexity of the type and really dive into the key points where folks are going to be most familiar.
I don't know if the audience is like that's never done this is like, I'm excited. I'm like, okay, I want to find out. So let's do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, so basically, what is the Enneagram? The Enneagram is a personality system. We said there's 9 types, and the system is rooted in psychology and spirituality. And so all of the types exist on a spectrum of what they look like when they're really healthy, and what we say when the type kind of loosens up and when they're freer, and then what they look like when they're really fixated. And really fixated is when you're really stuck in your personality type, like you can't move through it. The Enneagram is a growth system, and I guess we can start with type 9 and just kind of talking about, what is it the type 9 experience is. Type 9 is called the Peacemaker, or also the Mediator. They're really sort of easygoing, fun-loving type people. Their energy tends to be a little bit lower, a little bit sweeter. And people with this Enneagram type are consistently trying to avoid the feeling of anger. And they're trying to avoid anything that feels intense. And so one of the other names that it's called is the Harmonizer. And that's because 9s are when something intense happens, whether it's a feeling or a situation, they attempt to kind of balance it out and harmonize it, because those feelings feel too intense for the 9. And so for them, they can have a lot of behaviors around trying to numb intensity, or trying to numb the feeling of overwhelm that they can get frequently in their lives.
Yeah, so that can lead to some confusion and fogginess for type 9. And with that, I think we'll move to type 8. So type 8 is called the Challenger, and type 8 also has a special relationship with the emotion of anger. And you can kind of think of type 8, I like to think sometimes as we move around the Enneagram as a running away from the number before. So type 8 is they're very comfortable with anger and conflict. And sometimes 8s are described as aggressive, and not all 8s really jive with that label. Sometimes they will say, I'm not aggressive, I'm direct. So 8s have a really big presence, and they really are very hardworking, and they're good at getting things done. And they have these kind of big energies, and they have a special relationship with power, where they're kind of always looking around the room to see who's at a disadvantage, who might have a weakness, and then wanting to either poke or protect. So they're really they're very aware of the power in the room. And a lot of times that comes from 8s had to be really tough growing up. So they're very aware of kind of who's at a disadvantage, and they feel this kind of protective instinct to take care of that person. And it's very important to 8s to be strong, and they have a really hard time acknowledging any kind of vulnerability and leaning into softness. They're really the way that 9s avoid intensity is the way that 8s step into intensity. So they're really kind of grounding themselves in intensity. They like their relationships to be intense and their energy is intense. And yeah, that's type 8.
Yeah. And so, moving on to type 7, all of these types have really different energies about them. And so 9's energy is a little lower, 8's energy is really intense. 7's energy can be pretty intense too, but not in the same way 8 is. It's a really positive, really enthusiastic, kind of bouncy energy. 7's are called the enthusiasts or the adventurer, and they actually have quite a lot of fear in them, but they're trying to run away from the feeling of fear, and they're trying to kind of look at life as really optimistically and look at life on the positive terms instead of leaning into anything that's too negative or leaning into anything that's too hard. 7's have a really big fear of getting trapped. And that feeling of being trapped could come from commitment. It could be I'm scared of committing to a relationship. It could be scared of committing to my business. It could be just not wanting to get trapped in negative emotions in general. And so we kind of have this character emerge that is really bouncy and energetic and kind of always on the go and bouncing from thing to thing. They tend to be really fun people that are often the life of the party, and people that genuinely are really fun to be around. I just love hanging out with 7's.
Yeah. 7's are fun. So moving on to type 6. Type 6 is called the Loyalist, also called the Skeptic, and the Devil's Advocate. And type 6 has so many names because it operates on one of the most obvious spectrums. So all the types operate on a spectrum of some sort, but 6's spectrum is the one that we talk about the most because it relates to the 6's relationship with fear. So 6's have a kind of push-pull relationship with fear in their lives. So they're either very aware of their fear and really reacting and responding to their fear and kind of actively nurturing it, or they're completely unaware of fear and they are kind of jumping in front of it so that they don't have to feel it. And we call this spectrum phobic or counterphobic. But 6's are kind of looking out into the world and looking for what are the things that could be unsafe. Who is the authority in this situation? What are the rules in this situation? And how do I fit into that? So they're kind of looking outside of themselves for structure, for authority, and then based on if they're phobic or counterphobic, making a decision about how to interact with that structure or authority. And again, we're looking at this very push-pull kind of relationship. So on the more phobic end, the 6 is really looking out and saying, okay, this looks like this is what I'm supposed to do here. This looks like these are what the rules are here. So this is what I'm going to do because it will be safe if I do these things, if I just follow the rules and stay in the structure. Versus the counterphobic end, which is looking at the authority and saying, yeah, I don't trust you. You don't know what you're doing. I'm looking for inconsistency and I'm going to kind of aggressively help point out your inconsistency to prove that I can't trust you. So we're really looking at this kind of big spectrum with 6's of how they operate with fear and kind of how that influences how they show up in the world.
Yeah. And with type 5, 5 is also a type that is grappling with a lot of fear. And this type is dealing with fear by trying to consume knowledge and consuming, it's almost like the more knowledge I have and the more that I can center my intellect, the safer I will be. And the knowledge doesn't have to be about safety. Like, I mean, 5s often are consuming massive amounts of knowledge and becoming experts in like mushrooms or being an expert in psychology or, you know, whatever their field is. But there is this idea that they are safer if they live up in their minds. And so this is a type that they do end up being experts in their field a lot of the time, because it's just this intellectual muscle that they keep flexing, and it gets stronger and stronger. And so this type is really kind of grapples with the idea that they don't have enough. There's almost this like reaching out into knowledge to try to fill a void. And this type can really struggle with feeling like they don't have enough energy or enough resources to show up in life in the way that life demands them to. And so type 5s often, even though they can be extroverted, a lot of times tend to be more living in their minds, a little more introverted, and more sort of what I would say is like an academic type, or someone who's always consuming more and more knowledge.
And Hannah, what is 5 called?
Oh, 5 is called the investigator or the observer.
Yeah. So moving on to type 4. Type 4 is, so we're kind of moving out of the space of the Enneagram that is really centered around fear, and we're moving into the space of the Enneagram where we're really working with the emotion of shame. And shame is really important when talking about type 4, but type 4 is called the artist or the tragic romantic. I feel like there's another name that I'm forgetting. There it is. Oh my gosh, it just like flew out of my head. So we're really moving into the point on the Enneagram that has the most access, the easiest access to shame, and really to kind of emotion in general. Type 4s are pretty emotional people. They have a depth to them where they can kind of feel emotion in this way that other types just don't really seem to have access to. And so for type 4, the fixation is really about kind of looking out into the world and noticing what's missing and kind of longing for what that thing is, and really romanticizing and kind of creating a story about the missing thing and having a really hard time not focusing on that thing that's missing. The other thing that's important to mention about 4s is that oftentimes in childhood, they had this kind of experience where they felt like they somehow got excluded, or they got kicked out of this kind of circle of love or circle of belonging. And that they tend to reference that as a really big tragedy that happened to them. And they can kind of trace back the rest of their life to this tragic happening. And there tends to be a focusing on, a romanticizing about the time period before this tragedy happened. So we're looking at, with 4s, a lot of emotionality, a lot of just connection to pain and noticing of pain, and really, and being very self-aware. 4s really tend to know themselves pretty well and be able to kind of communicate their feelings in this really eloquent way, which you'll see because a lot of artists are 4s and musicians and things like that.
Yeah. A lot of self-expression happening with 4s. A
lot of Hannahs are 4s.
Well, so the next type that we're going to talk about with type 3 also has a really special relationship with shame. 4s are kind of really in touch with it and are trying to sort of lick their wounds, and 3s are not as much in touch with shame. They're called the achiever or the producer, and this is a character that's really tends to be very, very successful. They're a type of person who, when they decide to do something, they do it to 100%. 3s are sort of running away or trying to numb the feeling of shame. They can be cut off from their hearts in that way. But 3s are trying to win love or win approval or acceptance by being the best at what they do, and by trying really, really, really hard to be as kind of perfect or as successful or as achievement oriented as possible, because the times when they feel like they're failing or they're missing the mark, that's when they really start to feel their shame. It just really bubbles up in this really strong, powerful way. And so threes tend to be incredibly hardworking and very efficient. And they tend to be people who have a ton of skill and a lot of talents. A lot of the threes that I know are they're fluent in multiple languages, and then they also work on computers, and they're also a scientist. I mean, there's just like there can be a lot of intentional skill building with this type.
Yeah. And so, moving on to type 2. Type 2 is called the helper, also called the giver or the self-sacrificer. And type 2s also have a special relationship with shame. So type 2s really work to craft an image of themselves as kind of an altruistic do-gooder, really being helpful. Type 2s have a kind of an inner narrative about winning love, and feel like love isn't just kind of freely given, but it needs to be earned. And the way that it gets earned for type 2s is by being helpful, is by doing for other people, helping other people's needs get met. So this kind of external focus keeps the 2 distracted from noticing any kind of inner motivation that might be pushing this helpful behavior. So sometimes what happens for 2s is that they're giving to lots of other people, not knowing what they need. And then all of a sudden, they notice that they aren't getting what they need, and they get really angry about it. There's like resentment that comes out. It feels like this kind of burny sensation. And then the other person is all of a sudden like, wait, I thought you wanted to mow my grass and do my dishes and do 5 somersaults on camera for me, right? So there can be this kind of giving to get behavior with type 2s. And type 2s tend to be kind of sweet, bubbly, very warm characters. And they work hard to attract and build relationships. Sometimes type 2s are called the teacher's pet or the special friend. And because they really are that friend that will kind of check in with you and see how you're doing and work hard, is very naturally good at building and keeping relationship, but sometimes at the expense of themselves or their own needs.
Yeah.
Last but not least,
we'll end with type 1. Type 1 is called the perfectionist or the reformer. And the ironic thing is that many ones don't identify as perfectionists. They don't necessarily see that part of themselves. And really the way that perfectionism shows up with this type is they're either trying to perfect themselves. And so that can look like a lot of ones have really, really, really big self-criticism. There can be a lot of, I should do this, he should do this, they should do this. Sort of this like outward, perspective of looking out into the world and seeing what's not right. This tends to be a highly moralistic type. That's why they're called the reformer. They're folks who, because they're looking out into the world and they can see what's wrong, whether that's like what's wrong with society, or whether that's like what's wrong in my family, or what's wrong with me. So it's really kind of, it can project to, lots of different areas, but this is a type that's always striving to change. They're changing themselves. They're trying to change others. And they can be a bit so set on that sometimes they can struggle with being too rigid or being not able to be really flexible. This is a type that has sort of has developed their own system of rules of what they need to do and how they need to follow those rules, and they stick to it. So it's really difficult for ones to kind of break break their own rules. We have a big stereotype about ones that they're rule followers for everybody or for any system. And that's not true. It's really what is their own internal order and what do they think is important. Ones can be just as much rule breakers as an 8, for example. But they're in alignment with their own values.
It's so fascinating to hear you guys talk about the different types, and I wish we could do a deep dive into each one because it's so interesting, and I'm sure those of you who are listening are connecting with certain types more than others, and just hearing you ladies talk about them, it's given me more clarity on and more validation to where I really see myself, and it sparks a desire to want to do more of that deep dive. Just curious for anybody who does want to dive deeper, what do you recommend for how they can go about doing that?
Yeah, well, we always recommend that the best ways to learn about the Enneagram is to do a deep dive into it. That's how we get to know ourselves. And so The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut is a really great book to start with. The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson is a really great book to start with as well. And also, if you go to our website, empoweredenneagram.com, we have some basic information about all of the types and also give you a lot of information on our social media sites. We tend to do pretty consistent content every week of explaining a lot of these nuances about the types and how they're different. And so I think that those are some pretty good places to start. And also, when you do start with the Enneagram, it's okay to get overwhelmed and it's okay to not know your type because you're essentially diving into the human condition and the 9 ways that humans show up in life. And so it is a really big topic that can be pretty overwhelming quickly.
And then for anybody who wanted to work with you all on this, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, they can contact us at empoweredenneagram@gmail.com. We offer all kinds of services. We do one-on-one coaching, both to help find your Enneagram type and also, once you found your type, what do you do with that? We also we offer workshops. Our next one coming up is the Enneagram and relationships, and so it's all how do these types show up in your intimate relationships? And we focus a lot on communication and vulnerability and whatnot. So if you go to empoweredenneagram.com, we'll have all of our events listed and services listed there.
Nice. And we'll also put the books and everything on the show notes page and all that stuff so people can access that. Monica, what were you going to say?
Yeah, if you are a podcast person, we also have a podcast where we teach the Enneagram and we talk about different kinds of Enneagram concepts and how the Enneagram relates to stuff going on in the world. And we also do this, we do a fun episode every season around, we answer letters from people about kind of how they're seeing their type show up and then maybe a particular problem that they're having. Because we like to teach people not just about the Enneagram, but how to use it and apply it. And the podcast is a great place to check that out. Yeah. And we're just Empowered Enneagram. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Cool. And so before we close this part of our conversation and head on over to the second part, I know that you said there was from 4 down, there's a lot of shame stuff. Is there shame stuff with 1?
1 is actually, go ahead, Ham.
All of the types experience shame. It's really how they experience it. 1 experiences shame around making mistakes. And ones essentially feel like they might be a mistake, like they are internally flawed somehow. And so there's a lot of shame around that. But what Monica was referring to with types 3 and 4 and 2, feeling a lot of shame, that's the core emotion of those types. For 1, the core emotion is anger.
Interesting. Cool. Well, what do you guys hope that our listeners take away from part 1 of your message, talking about really the basics, quick, brief view of the Enneagram?
My hope is really that people understand that you are not your pattern. You don't have to endure kind of the same problem over and over and over again, and that there are really direct, clear ways to kind of dig yourself out of these coping mechanisms that you have developed. And the Enneagram is a great start. It's a great place. It's a great way to learn about that more direct pathway to your best, most fulfilled life.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And we're looking forward to part 2, which is the Enneagram, you and in crisis. And obviously with the world today and everything going on, I'm sure, it definitely shows up that way. So we're going to see you guys later for part 1. And we're going to head over to part 2 for next week. Kate?
Yep. We'll see you guys next time. And if you're enjoying these episodes, definitely subscribe, rate, and review our show. We always appreciate it when we hear from Startup Nation, because we want to make sure we're producing content that really meets your needs. So if there's an episode that you particularly loved, let us know. We enjoy that. And then if there's something missing that we haven't talked about, or you have a topic that you'd love to bring on the podcast, let us know that too. You can always email us or find us on Facebook. And we will see you next week for part 2.
Have an awesome, inspired day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.